Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Spoilers. Kate's plan to hold Scott prisoner could backfire badly when Lucky comes into the picture. General Hospital, spoilers assert FBI Special Agent John Jagger Cates, Adam Harrington, may be the culprit behind Scott Baldwin, Kin Shriner, being missing in action. When Police Commissioner Anna Devane, Finola Hughes, came looking for Jason Morgan, Steve Burton, he hardly assumed it would have anything to do with Scott's whereabouts. Having no answer for her about where he could be, it seemed like Anna believed him. But that leaves both of them questioning why he would go MIA, while Ava Jerome, Maura West, needs his help. Could Cates have Scott locked away while he tries to paint Jason and Sonny Corinthos, Morris Bernard, as complicit? If so, has he been careful not to stow him away near to where he just might spot a friendly face? When Scott knew he needed to protect the pharmacist who tampered with Sonny's bipolar meds on Valentin Cassadine's, James Patrick Stewart, orders, he tucked him away where he thought he would be safe. Instead, Jason was able to find him without much fuss at all. It turns out the mob may be more astute and skilled than the FBI. Nevertheless, Scott followed Jason and witnessed him threatening the pharmacist into compliance. Then suddenly, Scott was gone too. The supplies he had in hand for the pharmacist scattered on the floor. Scott was trying to take care of this guy he had tucked away to be an asset in Ava's case. Instead, he got more than he bargained for. But don't forget, Cates was alerted that Jason had tracked this guy down, and so he may have known Scott would feasibly cross paths with the mob enforcer. Now that Scott is being contained much like a prisoner, similarly to how the pharmacist was, we have to wonder whether he will end up crossing paths with another prisoner, like, say, Lucky Spencer, Jonathan Jackson. We still have no idea what Lucky is wrapped up in this time. Watching him being batted around and shoved into a cell with a burlap sack over his head didn't instill much confidence in the fans that Lucky will be back home soon. But could it be that Cates has Scott holed up in the same facility where the FBI or someone far more nefarious is holding Lucky too? In the dimly lit confines of a nondescript room within Port Charles' seedy underbelly, Agent Cates paced back and forth, his mind racing with the intensity of a man who knew he was playing a dangerous game. His plan was as simple as it was ruthless. Hold Scott Baldwin prisoner long enough to extract the information he needed about Victor Cassadine's final chess moves. Cates had crossed lines before, but this was different. He was gambling with lives in a way that could backfire spectacularly. Scott had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, a man who had long since retired his heroics for a quieter life, only to be dragged back into the fray. Cates knew Scott was no innocent bystander. He had deep connections with the power players of Port Charles, Lucico, Sonny Corinthos, and even Victor Cassadine himself. Scott had a web of secrets buried deep within him, secrets Cates was determined to uncover. But to hold Scott captive was to tempt fate. And fate had a way of twisting in ways no one could anticipate. Lucky Spencer's return to Port Charles had been quiet, almost ghostly. He hadn't intended to get caught up in the chaos that had taken over the town since his departure. But Port Charles was a magnet for trouble, and Lucky had always been its unwilling lodestone. The moment he caught wind of Scott Baldwin's disappearance, something inside him ignited, a fire long thought extinguished by years of battling his own demons. He had learned of the abduction through Elizabeth, who was frantic with worry. Scott was more than just a friend to her. He was a father figure, a link to the past that held so many of her memories. She had begged Lucky to look into it, to use his skills to find Scott and bring him back safely. Lucky didn't need much convincing. His sense of justice had always been unyielding, even when it cost him dearly. Lucky's investigation started small, with whispered conversations and subtle inquiries. It didn't take long for him to realize something far more sinister was at play. All roads seemed to lead back to a man who had been making waves in the shadows, Agent Cates. The name was unfamiliar to Lucky, but the reputation he uncovered was chilling. Cates was known for his unorthodox methods, a man willing to blur the lines between right and wrong to achieve his objectives. As Lucky delved deeper, the pieces began to fall into place. He discovered that Scott had information that could expose a network of corruption tied to Victor Cassadine's final plot. A network that Cates was desperate to either control or destroy. The idea that Scott was being held captive, possibly tortured for information, sent a shiver down Lucky's spine. He had to move fast, but with precision. One wrong step could put Scott's life in even more danger. Meanwhile, Scott was doing his best to stay resilient in the face of Cates' psychological warfare. The agent was relentless, using every trick in the book to break Scott's resolve. He played on Scott's fears, his guilt, his love for his daughter Serena. But Scott was no stranger to such tactics. He had faced down worse in his lifetime. Still, the isolation was wearing him down. The longer he remained Cates' prisoner, the more he feared that he might not have the strength to hold out. Lucky, unaware of just how close he was to finding Scott, began laying the groundwork for a rescue. He enlisted the help of an old friend, someone with connections that ran just as deep as his own, Robert Scorpio. Together, they formulated a plan to track down Cates' hideout. Robert, who had long since retired from the WSB, still had a few tricks up his sleeve. Using his old contacts, they narrowed down Cates' location to a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. As Lucky prepared to storm the warehouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too quiet, too easy. Cates was a seasoned agent. He wouldn't have made such a simple mistake. But there was no time to second-guess himself. If Scott was inside, every second counted. The warehouse was dark, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. Lucky moved silently, his senses on high alert. He knew Robert was close behind, ready to back him up if things went south. As they approached a heavy metal door, Lucky heard a faint sound, a voice. It was Scott, weak but unmistakable. He was alive, but for how much longer? Lucky signaled to Robert, and they prepared to breach the door. But just as they were about to make their move, the door swung open on its own. Cates stood there, a cold smile on his face, as if he had been expecting them all along. Looking for something? Cates sneered, his hand resting casually on the gun at his side. Lucky didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, catching Cates off guard. The two men struggled, a brutal clash of wills and strength. Cates was formidable, but Lucky had the advantage of desperation and a righteous cause. He managed to disarm Cates, slamming him against the wall. "Where's Scott?" Lucky demanded, his voice laced with fury. Cates laughed, a sound that echoed off the empty walls. "You're too late, Spencer. Scott's already told me everything I need to know. But you've just made things a lot more interesting." Before Lucky could react, Cates reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. With a press of a button, alarms blared throughout the warehouse. The sound was deafening, but what came next was worse. The building began to shake, the floor beneath them rumbling as if the earth itself was about to swallow them whole. "It's rigged to blow," Cates said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "You can try to save him, but I doubt you'll make it out alive." Lucky didn't waste time with words. He raced down the corridor, following the sound of Scott's voice. Behind him, Robert was doing his best to hold off Cates, but Lucky knew they were running out of time. He found Scott in a small windowless room, chained to a chair, bloodied but alive. Relief washed over Lucky, but there was no time to savor it. He quickly unshackled Scott, supporting him as they made their escape. The walls were beginning to crack, pieces of the ceiling falling around them as the warehouse continued to self-destruct. Just as they reached the exit, a massive explosion rocked the building, sending Lucky and Scott flying through the air. They hit the ground hard, the force of the blast knocking the wind out of them. But they were alive. That was all that mattered. As the dust settled, Lucky looked back at the wreckage of the warehouse. Kate's was nowhere to be seen, swallowed by the destruction he had orchestrated. But Lucky knew this wasn't the end. Kate's would resurface, and when he did, Lucky would be ready. For now, Scott was safe, and Port Charles had narrowly escaped another disaster. But the scars left by Kate's plan would linger, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. And as Lucky helped Scott to his feet, he vowed that he wouldn't rest until Kate's was brought to justice.